Being a Hulk asks for balance.
You know, you can probably find a bunch of other titles for this video, like How Marvel Lost Its Mojo, Marvel Sucks These Days, or maybe Disney corrupts everything it touches. Like, I'm gonna be completely honest, Marvel burnout is definitely a thing I'm totally experiencing right now. Like, if we're just talking about the MCU itself, I can remember going to watch Iron Man 14 years ago. God, 14 years ago, I'm an old man now. Someone put me down, please, put me out of my misery. I'm not gonna lie, part of the reason why I'm even making this video was because the morbid curiosity I had with She-Hulk. And I gotta tell ya, I regret looking back in that pit of depression. How She-Hulk taught the online trolls a lesson, eh? Oh yes, because everyone knows that giving trolls online attention is the best way to combat them.
Sarcasm is the lowest form of wit.
Yeah, we're gonna be talking about She-Hulk in this video, and how I feel like it's gonna be emblematic of some issues I have with the Marvel Universe, and why I don't think it's a good path for the MCU to take. Honestly, my interest in the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been dwindling ever since Endgame, and there's a number of reasons for it, which is why this video really exists. I mean, if you want to listen to YouTuber number 2,472 complaining about why the MCU is bad nowadays, which for some reason a lot of people like to listen to, well, buckle up, pals. I'm just having a fun time right here. Also, side note, this isn't going to be a full-on review of She-Hulk, so if you came here for that, sorry. Reason 1. Finality. I think this should be obvious, and I doubt that I'm going to be saying anything original here, but Endgame was that, the ending of what should have been a great setup for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, I personally have my issues with Endgame as a plotline, but I'm not here to express that unpopular opinion. Not yet anyway, I got no booze in my veins for that. We're currently dealing with something else. Regardless, the story essentially ended the era of Marvel Cinematics for that phase. Like, when you're talking about a plot that involves eradicating half of the life in the universe, it's the climax of the story. Unless the stakes are raised more and more, anything after that is going to be seen as an afterthought. Now, that's not to say it's impossible to make something like this work, and it seems like Phase 4 is going through the multiverse aspect. In my humble opinion, sometimes it works, and other times, not so much. And some, which have no actual connection to the MCU, are done exceptionally well. This is obviously a me issue, but that's a big duh for me. You're watching an opinion piece. Raising the stakes is certainly not a bad thing at all, but considering that Endgame was, well, an endgame, it really feels like anything after that, even with the multiverse stuff, it really comes off as unappealing to me, especially when most of the stories of the characters that we followed for over a decade have come to an end. And frankly, asking the audience to suddenly care about new characters after so long is kind of a tall order. At least to me, and I'm not saying it's impossible to like new characters through this, especially when they get their own films. But there's obviously going to be some pushback to the new characters in a long-running franchise like this. This is where She-Hulk comes into play. Yes, I am aware that she's been a long-running character in Marvel for many years. I'm also aware that the comic book character is highly beloved. Sometimes for less than pure reasons, but hey, I don't judge. Not like I've got a halo floating over my head. But the show that Marvel Studios recently wrapped up lacks the charm and impact that other stories have. It even got to the point where even the writers admitted in the last episode that their writing essentially sucks. Just because you pointed out, that doesn't mean you're being clever. And frankly, while I'm all for the idea of showing heroes dealing with everyday situations, the fact that She-Hulk at times spitefully takes jabs at the characters and stories that led up to this really rings hollow to me. Like, that combination of spite and an attempt of mundanity isn't really appealing to me, and some of the jokes really fall flat. Which leads into my next point.
Now that's comedy.
Reason 2. Comedy. Now, I love me some comedy. I love me some snark. And one of the more, I suppose best word is, charming aspects of the MCU was that it had a bit of a tongue-in-cheek sort of humor to it. Let's face it, if you really think about the universe of Marvel, there's a lot of goofy stuff. And frankly, I'm fine with there being a wink and nod to some of the more goofier elements in the universe. The problem is that when it keeps happening and almost everyone has their moments of snark, it loses its charm and becomes annoying when almost every character points out some illogical aspect of the universe. Now, if that was all the issues I had with She-Hulk's comedy, well, it'd still be an issue, but I'd probably just be drowning my sorrows in homemade bathtub hooch like any normal American during these trying times. But unfortunately, it isn't just that. For a show that's supposed to be a comedy, She-Hulk is dreadfully unfunny. But Kamen, comedy is subject, blah blah blah, I know! Just hear me out before you start getting upsetty spaghetti, because it's not just really a subjective taste, it's also how the comedy comes at the expense of things. I've already pointed out there seems to be a bit of a vindictiveness in the last section of this video to the MCU, but one of the bigger factors is the oddity in the old so-called jokes. Like, just for example, it was made apparent in the earlier portions of the show's run that the writers didn't know how to write rousing courtroom scenes. And you know, it does show, because there seems to be a lack of understanding of how the courts actually work, or how lawyers work? Like, the courtroom scenes act like they're just matches of debates where people talk over each other. It's like the writers just picked up a copy of Phoenix Wright and thought, this is exactly how courtrooms work! Only, you know, without the nuance of Phoenix Wright's commentary on the Japanese court system, the actual over-the-top cases, the witty writing, the memorable characters, oh, and the actual funny jokes. Probably the best example of the comedy falling flat on its face is the ending where Jen confronts the writers of the show, basically lampshading how bad the writing is on it and attempt to basically hand-wave criticism of the show's writing. Just because you point out how bad your writing is and just magic it away, that doesn't automatically mean it's good, nor does it mean it's clever either, or funny. Honestly, as someone who's seen a ton of fourth wall breaking media, I found this to be not all that thrilling. Especially since up to this point, the only fourth wall breaks that Jen had was able to speak to the camera. Suddenly she has the ability to break into our real world? Now, I know a lot of people are going to bring up the comics. Hell, there was a time where She-Hulk ripped her own comic up out of frustration, or complaining to the writers that her comic sucks. But much like how I disagree bringing up Hulk's history of fatherly abuse in the comics as a means against She-Hulk, I'm also against this, mainly because this is a different continuity, and you still need to have this thing called establishment. Like, they could have played more with the fourth wall, like having Jen bumping into the camera or something like that. They did have her call out a narrator, but to me that still doesn't seem like she should be able to push through Disney+. This is a show, not the comics. We're talking about the show, not She-Hulk as a whole. Proper build-up and foreshadowing is necessary. Now, you can say that just talking to the camera is enough for you, but suspension of disbelief isn't universal. Hell, the idea of Jen messing with the fourth wall isn't a bad thing. It's a trait that people obviously can love if the comics are an indication, and if the fourth wall was played a bit more, I could find myself liking Jen a bit more. Raison 3, the characters. I'm probably gonna say something here, and that's I'm mixed up on the characters. Like, chalk this up to me not being the target demographic, but hey, when's that ever stopped me before? Like, Jen, I'll be straight up, she isn't likable. And this isn't because she's a woman, like a lot of people seem to think that the reason why people dislike the character, even the showrunners. I myself have criticized a ton of male characters in the past. Hell, if I had to pick one who reminds me of Jen, it'd be Alex from Yick, a character who also has the ability to break the fourth wall, has a higher opinion of himself, and can be selfish to an obnoxious degree, and ultimately, essentially breaks the fourth wall to solve his issues. Which is better? You put a gun to my head, I'm still not going to answer that question. Like, to give some credit, in the final 2 episodes, Jen faces consequences for her actions at the award show, where she loses everything because she was tricked and is forced to face the reaction. I actually like this because this is how you make a character relatable, where they're facing against challenges. It makes us want to root for the character since we want them to win. There are just 2 issues with this. The first is that this is at the end of the season, and throughout the season, Jen barely has to be confronted with anything that could help her develop as a character. I'm sure there are people who will disagree with me, but Jen doesn't really change over the course of the show, especially when the end of the show she literally goes to head honcho of Marvel Studios to get what she wants, even essentially hand-waving the fact that she put several people in danger and was arrested. It's a comedy, why are you taking it so seriously? Oh, I'm sorry, are you implying that comedies can't have good writing or a point? Or we actually have some halfway decent character development for a character whose main criticism from a ton of people was that she didn't develop throughout the story and gets her way? You can have a comedy with actual storyline and stakes. While I don't care for the comedy in the show and found some of the points dumb, that's what the rest of the show was, having a storyline and episodic stakes. Also, comedies can still have serious moments as well as still having character development. Something that I recently pointed out in my Hello Voss videos, saying something is a comedy as a defense of bad writing is not a good defense, since bad writing is still bad writing regardless of genre, especially when the show that does want to cover some serious topics such as sexism, online abuse, and jumping out of windows. The second issue is with this. Jen outright ignores what Bruce warns her at the beginning of the show and basically just has the problem solved by complaining to the writers and Kevin. I do not consider this to be good writing, nor do I consider this to be witty or comical. Now, this is just a few reasons why I think She-Hulk is a bad direction for the MCU to take. Disagree with me if you like, that's perfectly fine, and frankly after this video I think I'm done with Marvel content on my channel. Not that I'm known for anyway. If I want a hero, I can talk about Kamen Rider Geats. And in fact, I do want to talk about that. Because when She-Hulk was being rolled out, a new Kamen Rider series came as well. And while the CG for the show is cheap and could be argued to be slightly cheaper for the bigger monsters than for She-Hulks, to me, Kamen Rider Geats is what a show about heroes should be about. To give a quick rundown of the plot, the world is about to be destroyed, but regular people are chosen to become Kamen Riders to fight against the bad guys in a game-like setting, where the winner of each game can be granted any wish, even wishes that could bend reality and bring the dead back to life. Now the show has an obvious serious plot, but also has its moments of comedy that to me really work out. But the show also covers some darker topics as well, such as nihilism and how it can actively skew a person's perception into dangerous levels of negativity. Not to mention the show has some amazing action set pieces, and can use its limited effects budget really well. One character in particular I really want to bring to attention is the secondary protagonist of the show, the guy who isn't the titular Kamen Rider Geats. Rather, he's Kamen Rider Tycoon. He's also known as Kawa. He's innocent, but he's also gullible. A lot of the characters in the show do trick him or take advantage of his naive nature. Most of the time in the story, instead of fighting the monsters, he'll often relegate himself to save innocent people who get caught in the crossfire. And he actively tries to help his fellow riders, even at his detriment. And he actually has some effect on the characters, but ultimately the rest of the cast is selfish. For good reason, mind you. If you had the chance to change the world however you wanted, you certainly would do anything to achieve that. You would use anyone as a stepping stone. Eventually, in the latest episode that took place as I'm writing this, Kawa pushes himself too far, especially when his sister gets caught up in monster attacks. He's willing to become a decoy for a giant monster so the rest of the party can defeat the monster by kicking a giant can. I told you it had its sillier moments. When it looks like Kawa is about to be killed by the giant monster attack, he gets saved by one of the power-ups in the game and uses it to get an insanely kick-ass scene. Unfortunately, the character pushes himself too far, his injuries are too much, and he's booted from the game for his reckless actions. The reason why I bring this up is because this is how a hero should be. They should have goals, they should have likable traits, they should be willing to do what they can to save others, and they should also face consequences for their actions. When a character's actions don't have consequences, that's not heroic to me. It doesn't make me respect the character because they're not fighting for anything to improve themselves. So when I say something like Marvel forgot how to make heroes, they forgot how to make heroes that people can look up to, that we admire, that we strive to become. Then I think Kamen Rider is just an objectively better show than She-Hulk. Fight me.
Bye! Bye-bye!
Ready? I'm Punk Jack!
Punk Jack?
Huh?